அலைக்கும் எல்லாருக்கும். ஒரு தமிழ் பேசும் வெள்ளக்காரன் ஒரு புதுனமாய் இருந்தாலும் நான் இங்கிலீஷ்ல நான் பேச போறேன். So, and I think so many of you know the story, so I'm repeating myself for many of you. But as Siraj said, I first came to Sri Lanka in 1969, and I stayed until 1971. And I came because I was a graduate student at the time at the University of Chicago, and I had read a book by this professor, whom some of you may know this man, Noor Yalman. He was an anthropologist at Chicago who had written a very interesting book called Under the Bow Tree. And in that book, he had at least 2 chapters about East Coast. One was about Tambaliville. One was about this Muslim village near Bibile. And he was fascinated by the fact that these places were matrilineal, tracing descent through women, Taiwari. So he said, Dennis, you really need to go and look at this and figure out how it really works. So I took him up on that proposition. I came and I got a grant, and I came in 1969. And I searched and searched and searched for a good place to do the research. You know, we anthropologists, we have to find a place and then sort of put down roots. So I traveled up and down the East Coast. I didn't go to Trinco, but I went particularly to Potterville a couple of times, back and forth. And finally, I talked with Professor Gadanath Obyasekara at Peradeniya, and he said, I know a man in Tambaliville, Dharmalingam. He was the VC chairman at the time, Dharmalingam. Yeah. So I went and I looked up Mr. Dharmalingam, and he was very helpful to me. He introduced me to the Tamil side of town, but he didn't know much about the Muslim side. So he said, I know a man who can help you. His name is Shaulamid. He's the Qazi. He's the man who is the Muslim judge, and he would be a great help. So I found Shaulamid, who is the Vapa of that and this man. So Nilam and Nawaz or Razin Hamid are his sons. He was a very helpful man. And he encouraged me to look at both the Muslim side of town and the Tamil side. So, as I remember, Nilam, you and I went looking for a place to rent, Vardahaivirdi. And we found one. It was right on the dividing line between the Muslim side in the north, the Tamil side on the south. So I could speak to a Tamil guy over the back fence, and across my street in the front, it was a Muslim family. So that was perfect for me. And I tried to spend my time half in the Muslim side, half in the Tamil side. So Nilam was a great help in doing this. I also had another research associate who was very, very helpful to me. You may know him. His name is K. Kandanathan. He lives in Division 7. I saw him just this morning. So Kandanathan was my Tamil helper. Nilam and Nawaz were my Muslim helpers, and also Najmuddin, who I think we all knew, and who recently passed away. So K. Najmuddin too was a big help for me. So those are the beginnings. I rented a house from a Muslim shopkeeper, Abu Tahir al-Mudaladi, on Main Street. Naushad's Vapa, his father. So I would always go to Abu Tahir's house. Every day I'd stop by, he'd give me a cup of tea. And he was a great help to me too. I actually started the serious work of taking notes and talking to people systematically only in January 1970. I stayed in Akrapatu from January 1970 until July 1971. I took a vacation now and then. I went to Colombo, I went to Norelia. I even went to North India briefly just for fun. But most of the time I was here. And I just, at the beginning, I really just needed to talk to people and learn how to speak Tamil. I had only had 1 year of Tamil class in University of Chicago. My instructor was a man, at the time he was just a graduate student himself, like me. But his name is E. Annamalai. And only later did I learn this Tamil instructor, he became a big, big man in linguistics. He ended up being the director of Central Institute of Languages in Mysore. Yeah. And now he's in Chicago, so I'm still in touch with him. But at the time, I didn't know. He was just a graduate student, like me, right? So anyway, that's my connection to the beginnings of Tamil. And of course, he was teaching me, Madurai, Tamil Nadu Tamil. So, a book was not a puttaham, it was a pustaham with a hum. But it was good because by the time I got to Akhrepattu, I knew a little bit of Tamil, but not a lot. And it was great because Nilam and a whole bunch of young guys, all like me, unmarried, still thinking about getting a job, still thinking about getting a wife, they would come to my house every day and give me my Tamil lessons. And I would write down how to conjugate the words and keep my vocabulary going. I also spent a lot of time in a place called the New Star Hotel, which, I don't know, does it still exist on the main street? New Star. Yeah, it was right across sort of from where the Ismail Stores building was. I spent a lot of time in New Star Hotel, drinking tea, taking notes. Irka? Innum? So, anyway, that's right. I'm with the Varisham done. So I have to focus my research on something. My supervisor at Chicago was this Nuri Alman. He was a kinship man. So I focused pretty much on his topics. I spent, for the Tamils, Tamils and Muslims both, I studied the Kudimurai, the matrilineal clan system.
Tell them how you learn the verbs and how you conjugate them and things like that.
Well, I just copied these guys. I mean, at first people said, oh, the Verakaran, we must teach him perfect Tamil. Murta Tamil, the kind of Tamil that you hear, it's, the political speech or something. And that was hopeless. So finally, these guys, they realized that what I needed to learn was Koche Tamil. Not formal Tamil, but spoke Pecha Tamil. So that was a big help because the older people, they couldn't understand why I should be learning this. But the young people, they knew. And they were a big, big help. So I would take, Milan remembers I had little note cards. I would write the name, the verb, and then I'd have to conjugate it. So I'd be sitting in New Star Hotel, and I'd learn a new verb, and I'd say, party pen, party name, party, just try to learn the conjugations. So and that's sort of how I learned Tamil. It took me, I'm still learning Tamil, even now. The topics I looked at was, the kinship and marriage systems, the Kudimurai. I also looked at, from the Hindu point of view, I was very interested in the Hindu caste, the Sadi Murai. So I've written a lot about Hindu caste in Akhrepattu, and I also have written quite a bit about Muslim specialists. I think you would call them specialists. I'm thinking of Maulana, Bawa, Sufi Sheikh, Osta, the barber, Osta Mama, who did the circumcision. So I sort of, in my book, it's got little sections about all of those groups. You forgot, okay. Let's see, what have I forgotten? So this book, Crucible of Conflict. It finally came out in 2008. My PhD thesis was written in 1974. That's an elapsed period of time of 34 years. It takes a long time sometimes for us to write books. The book is not just my PhD thesis. It has a lot in it from my PhD thesis, but a lot more that I added later, particularly about history. I was fascinated to sort of learn more about the history of Batiklo, history of Akrapati. And I'm not good with historical texts, but I had some help. You may remember the late D. Sivaram Taraki. So he became a good friend of mine. He was Dharmaratna Vanyanar's grandson, no?
Grandson.
Yeah. So I understand. There's a connection there. Sivaram was despite his politics, he was really interested in history and culture. So he helped me understand books like Mattakalapu Manyam and other books like that. And then I also found some Dutch records too in the National Archives. And I had some of that translated for me, so that took a long time. So the book does have a historical part. There's a chapter about history. But basically, the heart of the book is caste, kinship, marriage, and certain kinds of religion. But during this time, as we all know, the whole region of Sri Lanka became engulfed in a terrible, terrible war, the Irlam Wars, LTT problems, went on and on and on. That happened too. And then there was a tsunami, 2004. So I was writing this book and these other things were happening. So the book has the title, Crucible of Conflict. I probably wouldn't have given it that title if it weren't for the fact that there was political conflict at that time. So the book it's got that aspect of it, the current political, military situation, a little bit about the tsunami. But in the middle of the book, the center part of the book, is still really about social patterns, cultural patterns, and some history. And fortunately now, 16 years later, after the book is published, I'd say the political situation looks better in Sri Lanka and also in the East. So my hope is that the book, now that it's been made available, this is a reprint. This is the second reprint of the book. The first was by Social Science Association in Colombo, but they sold everything. They sold every book, and they didn't reprint. So for about 10 years, you couldn't get this book. So I finally arranged with the Tambaparni academic publishers to publish a second reprint edition. It's the same book. There's a slight difference on one page where I've written this short introduction to the new volume, but everything else is the same. The cover is a little different. Some of you actually have a copy of the book. This picture is on the cover of the old book, but there's also another picture up here of Muslim women coming home from the field. They've been doing weeding in some rice paddy. For some reason, they couldn't reproduce the photograph. The title is the same. One photograph is the same. But I'm so pleased that it's available now, and I hope that the people who don't know anything about what I've done have a chance to look at it and see what they can learn. It's not the sort of book you read to children. It's not a book to sort of sit down and say, I'm just going to read this thing from start to finish. It's a technical book. It has lots of technical anthropology. But what I'm hoping is that the book would enable people to look at specific questions, like, you're interested in the Bawas? Okay, I've got quite a bit in here about the Bawas. You interested in the Veera Maheswara Kurulinga Sangamar priests who were the priests in Kokadichole? Well, there's a whole section about them. So I'm hoping that just parts of the book will be useful today to scholars to look again, see if it's the same, see if it's different, and in any case, just use this as something from the past that you can compare with the future. So that's my hope. So thank you so much for helping me talk about this, and if you have questions, try to do my best to answer. Thank you.
Let's move to the discussion. Tell us about Professor Noor.